chapter 4 then start to introduce this idea of business strategy. So we're going to start thinking about what we mean by strategy, and then consider how a business goes about making that decision. So thinking about perhaps what options are available to us within the environment and the scenario that we're currently in. So we need to make sure that we're considering everything that's going on around us, and that will enable us then to make a good decision in terms of what I want to do strategy-wise. So the first thing we do is just to discuss what strategy really is, and we've got some a definition here from SEMA. So strategy is a course of action, including specification of the resources required to achieve a specific objective. So my strategy is trying to think about what it is we're trying to do, what resources I have, and then what the course of action is that we're going to use to get there. So it's all about our long-term direction. So over many years, I need to consider the environment in which I operate. So we're going to come on to this, but for example, what competitors do I have? What suppliers do I have available? And also then thinking about the resources. So what is my human resource? What access to materials and so on do I have? Now, it's too easy just to say we have one strategy for the overall organization. What we really need to consider is that I need to tailor this strategy or present this strategy in a different way depending on who I'm talking to and what decisions they're going to be making. So we look at three different levels really when it comes to strategy. We look at corporate strategy, we look at business strategy, and we look at functional strategy. And if you were to think about my overall organizational kind of hierarchy, my corporate strategy would be right at the top here with my board, my business strategy would be with those middle managers, and my functional strategy then would be down at the kind of operational end. And the notes here just talk us through those different levels. So corporate strategy is going to be our overall corporate mission and objective. So what are we actually trying to achieve overall, our overall goal? So, for example, Ford will have some sort of mission around producing quality motor vehicles, probably at reasonably affordable prices, and they'll have, missions and objectives around the quality and the perhaps patterns of behaviour. So, thinking about how they expect their staff to behave and that sort of thing. We'll be making decisions at this level, this board level, about what I'm going to make and where I'm going to try and sell it. So for example, am I going to try and enter a new market, a new growth market? Am I going to try and buy somebody, buy a competitor, for example? Also going to include the kind of infrastructure investments that I'm going to need to go along with that. So if I'm going to try and expand, or if I'm going to try and launch this new product, what kind of things, for example, around IT do I need to invest in? It's going to consider my overall financing decisions, so where I actually get the money to fund these new projects, and it's going to consider my stakeholder relationships. So, what kind of dividend policy do we have around my shareholders? What's my policy around where I get my money from, and how do we interact with the government? What impact does the government have on us? Business strategy then falls into a slightly more streamlined approach. So rather than looking at the overall business, it looks at now what we'd call strategic business units. So thinking about, for example, how this particular market is going to be approached. Up here with my corporate strategy, I'm thinking about which markets. Now I'm thinking about how I'm going to approach this particular market. And then functional or operational strategy is more of a day-to-day basis. So it's thinking about how we use our production resources, our operations, our human resource, and how we deliver then using those resources the overall required return or result. Strategic management then takes this definition of a strategy and thinks about how I can adapt that or influence it. So strategic management is now my role as the overall kind of decision maker. So I need to think about what we're doing overall, what our scope is, where we're going with this. I need to think about our long-term direction, and I need to think about the allocation of my resources, and those resources obviously can include lots and lots of different things. In terms of making decisions then, if I'm going to make good decisions that are going to be the very best decisions for my organization, I need to ask myself a few questions. So for example, what are we good at? Okay, what are my current strengths? How might the market change? So for example, is there any new technology? Are there any social changes that we'd expect? So, for example, people moving towards wanting a more renewable energy, and people wanting to be a bit more responsible with their purchases. How can I make sure I'm delivering customer satisfaction? And I suppose within that needs to be what the customer wants. And what I'd like to do is think about what the customer wants now, but also perhaps how the customer requirements are going to change, and what the customer wants, does that feed back into my strengths? Is what I'm good at, is that what the customer actually values? Because if it's not, I might need to change what I'm doing. Finally, then we think about what might prevent our plan from coming into being. So what could happen in the future? Perhaps thinking about some future threats that might jeopardize my future plans. Now again, just to hammer home exactly what we mean by strategic decisions, Johnson and Scholes summarised the strategic decisions as follows. So, like I said, they involve the scope of the business activities, they match my activities to my capabilities and to my external environment. Again, really, really important that a business thinks about their external environment. You can't run a business by looking inwards. They revolve around the allocation of resources. So I take what I have and I try to utilise them in the best way that I possibly can. They link into my operational decisions then. So they feed down, my overall objective feeds down into my operational decisions. They're based upon the value and expectations of senior management. So it's really important to have senior management buy-in, and also to have the right people in those senior positions, because those are the people that are going to be managing this overall approach. They dictate my long-term direction, and they lead to change. Change is often something that people fear within a business, but actually change is where you're going to end up being able to make the maximum kind of strides, make those maximum benefits in terms of moving the business forward. So that's a bit of an intro around strategy and strategic management. In the next recording then, we're going to pick up the strategic planning process, so actually putting into place a process by which I can make a good decision in terms of the overall strategy of the business.